Welcome to the 40 Finance channel. Today we're talking about Crowdstrike stock, and this is one here that's been on quite the turnaround since August 2024 when the company experienced an outage, a severe outage, affected a lot of companies online, and the confidence level of their offering, really hit a floor. And after that event, the stock went down to 225, 220, something like that. And now you're back up to 385. The market itself has had a decent amount of weakness here. On February 18th, it was 455. Now you're down to 385. And with all the sudden fluctuation, I guess the question I'm going to try to answer today is what's a good floor price for CrowdStrike? What's a good target if you're looking at this stock? Maybe you missed the 200, 220 entry point. What's fair in this market to start a new position in this one? It's got an awfully high valuation, but that's really been the case for CrowdStrike for, the past several years. So we'll dig into this one from a fundamental standpoint. And as always, we'll be using Seeking Alpha Premium for all of our data points and analysis. If you're interested in learning more about this stock research platform and potentially support my channel as well, check out the link in the description. You get a free 7-day free trial as well as $30 off your first year. Now, since we're talking about price floors and potential entry prices for CrowdStrike, I sort of want to embrace the bearish sentiment, or at least highlight the bearish sentiment, I guess. So I picked a recent article that had a bearish tone here on Seeking Alpha. This is from an independent author, but this particular author highlights a few things. So CrowdStrike is significantly overvalued, requiring unrealistic growth to justify its $102 billion market cap, making it a potential sell for current investors. Despite strong fundamentals and favorable industry trends, CrowdStrike's 60% premium over fair value is too generous given its past reliability issues. The company's land and expand strategy and high R&D investments support growth, but fierce competition and high expectations pose substantial risks. And then lastly, CrowdStrike's flawless earnings history might temporarily boost share prices, but long-term success is uncertain, making the valuation unsustainable. All right, so let's take that sentiment and analyze it a little bit on the basis that CrowdStrike does have an established history in the stock market. It's a growth stock that has grown for, at least as long as I can remember, 5+ years or so. And let's take a look at how it's growing today in comparison to how it's grown in the past, and then measure that with the current valuation. So Seeking Alpha makes this easy. They give you the percentage growth. If we're looking at revenue growth forward, I'm always looking ahead on forward metrics, not rear view metrics. CrowdStrike's revenue is projected to grow at about 29% for this fiscal year. The 5-year average, however, what they've grown in the past was an average of 48%. Now, the next thing we'll look at is EPS diluted growth, 42% growth on the bottom line. That is down too, though, from the 5-year average, which stood about 67, 68%. So it's a minus 38% difference in the pace of growth for the bottom line. And the reason these two numbers are important to me is, again, we're talking about a growth stock with the high multiples. So the high multiple is fine, and the market has certainly paid it in the past, but it is important to note that pace that has been paid for in the past is not the same pace that we're at today. All right, so now let's look at forward valuation. CrowdStrike's a non-GAAP reporting company. So the forward non-GAAP PE is coming in right now at 101. The 5-year average, however, is basically 360. Okay, so the multiple has come down 71% versus the 5-year average. So while the growth is slowing for CrowdStrike, you actually have a valuation that at surface level, you say, well, geez, it's a 101 multiple. But compared to where it's been at the past, it's actually much cheaper today than where it was just say 3 or 4 years ago. Okay, next, I like to take into account how the consensus earnings estimates are changing over time. And with CrowdStrike, it's very interesting because you have a earnings call that's coming up very soon. I think it's on March 4th, so give or take 5-ish days away from when I'm making this video. And at least for right now, if we look at the trend for the fiscal year that's about to close, it's basically already closed, but they're about to report on it, you have a consensus EPS of about 376. Now, if I look back even to, let's just say December, and I know you can't see this very well. Well, back in Thanksgiving, it looks like, that number was 364. So the consensus number that's about to come out here on March 4th has actually went up a decent chunk over the past 60 days. The big thing, though, that's going to be interesting is we are literally days away from shifting all of our focus over to the next fiscal year. The fiscal year consensus for 2026, which is essentially this calendar year, but it won't get, it won't officially end until March of 2026 when they report those earnings. But long story short, we're about to focus on this story here. And right now that number's at 442. And if I go back to November, that number was at 430. So this number has also jumped up. So the momentum for the EPS revisions is going up, which is a positive sign if you're holding this stock. And then on the revenue side, you basically have the same thing. So Jan of 2025, almost $4 billion, and they are projected to surpass $4 billion in 2026. And when you see those lines highlighted, they took a step down, looks like at the end of July, but it's held pretty consistent ever since then. Now, the other thing I want to do, since you've got this high multiple, is just take a quick look at some of the other stocks in this cybersecurity area. Now, for this particular basket that I put together, you got Fortinet, Palo Alto, Zscaler, Checkpoint, and CyberArk. If we go and just skip all the way ahead to see who is doing what on the forward PE metrics, you have CrowdStrike at 101, Fortinet at 43, Palo Alto at 58, Zscaler's at 65, Checkpoint's at 21, CyberArk is 95. Now, that is a comparison without factoring in growth rates. So let's take a look at who's growing at least as fast as CrowdStrike. And on the forward EPS growth, anyway, you got CrowdStrike at 42%. CyberArk is above them at 62. And then the next biggest jump goes to Zscaler, coming in at 26% or so. On the revenue forward, CrowdStrike's just underneath 30%, and it's really CyberArk and Zscaler who are the closest match to them. Okay, let's put this all together. So for me anyway, I'm always concerned about how we're growing now compared to the pace that we grew at in the past. And if your CrowdStrike, your revenue growth pace, if you will, is 40% lower than it has been over the 5-year average. EPS is about the same, minus 38%. Now, that's not ideal, obviously, but the big difference is in the valuation. The forward PE of 101 today, which, by the way, is about to expire, give or take, in 5 days as we shift ahead to the next fiscal year, the forward PE of 101 is actually a 72% improvement over the 5-year average. So it's funny to talk about multiples, to say CrowdStrike has a high multiple. It does when you compare it to the rest of the market, but on the same token, that multiple is significantly less than what other people have paid prior to this time. Next, we got the price today, 386 is, this 101. I put 102 here for some reason, but, 101, 102 times the consensus estimate that we'll find out in just a few days, 376. That's your price today of 386. Now, as far as price targets, entry points, floors, however you want to look at it, I'm going to wimp out and choose two sides here because I think there is two very legitimate ways to look at this. So next year's EPS, which is going to be the focus coming into play very quickly, it was 442 on Seeking Alpha. The uptrend was slightly there, so I just did 444. So I'm going to say the consensus is correct as of today. We'll get validation of that on the earnings call, but 444, then you have to decide what valuation are you going to give it. So if we talked about the competitors, Cyber was getting about a 90 forward PE. And in that case, 90 times next fiscal year's EPS, that's $399. And that $399 is a forward PE that's even less than you have today. Today, you're at 101. So if you went 101 times 444, you obviously get to $440. But what if it takes the Z-scalar level? Because the growth was comparable, right? The pace of growth was very comparable. Well, Z-scalar was only bringing in a 60 multiple, which is still high by stock market standards, but very few companies grow at the pace that these companies are growing at. Well, 60 times 444, that's a price of 266. So in my opinion, there is quite a valley of price discrepancy on where this one would go. If I was going to bet $1 on either side, I would say, assuming there's no negative news and CrowdStrike remains on pace, well, this $399 makes a lot more sense based on where it's traded in the past. And then it's almost like this is the floor, okay, Z-scalar level. And I think to get to this floor, you're going to need either a disaster of an earnings, or we would, of course, have to look back to another outage. And if you're CrowdStrike, you'd have to assume you're doing everything you can to never have an outage like that again. But 266 would be this one-time scenario or this absolute disaster scenario where you could potentially get in this one. The momentum at 266, if it goes back to that, it's going to be the same as we saw back in August. It's going to be low momentum, low sentiment, earn trust back kind of thing. But that would probably be what you're looking for if you're looking for the absolute floor. All right, guys, so there's a couple price targets for you for CrowdStrike stock. Let me know which one you think is more reliable, the $399 or the $260. We've got 3 or 4 days to make your guess before they come out with their next earnings call. And before you go, don't forget to check out that special offer for Seeking Alpha down below. I hope everybody's doing well. We'll see you on the next video.